To the world, it seemed that Beck Weathers had met his tragic end on Mount Everest in 1996, a victim of the most devastating climbing disaster in the mountain's history, which claimed the lives of 8 climbers. As relentless winds howled and the cold gnawed at every fiber of their beings, Weathers and his fellow climbers fought their way down from the summit. Disoriented and spent, Weathers seemed to have succumbed to hypothermia, his body lying motionless on the unforgiving South Col at an altitude of over 7,900 meters. In the harrowing 24 hours that followed, a mountain guide and then a doctor braved the harsh conditions to assess his state. Each time they concluded that Weathers, a Texan pathologist, was beyond saving. No one had ever awoken from a hypothermic coma, let alone at such a staggering altitude. Abandoned on the mountain, Weathers was thought to be lost forever. His wife received the tragic news, and the mourning commenced. But then, against all odds, a miracle happened. For many years, Beck Weathers had been a passionate mountaineer, tirelessly pursuing the elusive dream of conquering the 7 summits, the tallest peak on each continent. He had already scaled several of these awe-inspiring mountains, but there was one that called to him like no other. Mount Everest, the most formidable challenge of them all. With unwavering focus, Weathers prepared to dedicate himself entirely to this epic ascent. After all, he had nothing left to lose. His marriage had crumbled beneath the weight of his mountainous ambitions, as he had chosen the peaks over his family time and time again. Yet, even in the face of such personal turmoil, Weathers' thoughts were not with his loved ones. Blinded by his desire to stand atop Everest, he cast aside caution, recklessly disregarding the very real dangers that lay ahead. Upon arriving in Lukla, a picturesque village nestled at 2,800 meters above sea level, the climbers embarked on a week-long trek through the rugged Khumbu region. Their destination, Everest Base Camp. Here, they would join forces with the fearless Sherpas, skilled mountain specialists, and tireless porters. This essential journey helped acclimatize their bodies to the soaring altitudes that awaited them. As they reached Everest Base Camp, perched at 5,364 meters, Weathers found himself gasping for breath, his chest aflame with exertion. Yet he couldn't help but marvel at the awe-inspiring sight of the mighty Khumbu Glacier waterfall cascading from a staggering 400 meters above. Weathers' determined expedition team included 3 expert guides, the renowned Rob Hall, Mike Groom, and Ang Dorji, as well as fellow climbers John Krakauer, Yasuko Namba, Doug Hansen, Stuart Hutchinson, Frank Fishbeck, and John Task. Once acclimated at the base camp, the team began their harrowing ascent towards Everest's summit on May 9th. They faced the notorious Khumbu icefall and at the halfway point confronted the treacherous 500-meter ice wall known as the Lhotse Face. With its merciless, frictionless surface, the slightest misstep could prove fatal. Tragically, on that very day, a Taiwanese climber would experience this harsh reality, losing his life at the unforgiving wall. The group's plan was straightforward. Climb throughout the day, reach Camp 4 at the South Col by late afternoon, rest for a mere 3 to 4 hours, then forge ahead through the night and morning to conquer Everest's summit by noon on May 10th. As the climbers finally reached Camp 4, they found themselves running late due to the sheer number of people on the mountain that day. 4 separate teams, all vying for Everest's peak. Situated on the precarious South Col, they had to tread carefully, for one misstep could lead to a staggering 2,000-meter fall on the north side, or a 1,500-meter plunge on the Lhotse side. On their arrival, a fierce windstorm raged, leaving Weathers and his fellow team members utterly drained from the cold and fatigue. It was here, in this inhospitable realm known as the Death Zone, where the mountain would slowly claim lives. Around 10 p.m., the storm suddenly subsided. An eerie, frozen calm enveloped the Death Zone, and it was in this moment of stillness that Hall, their seasoned guide, signaled for the departure. Setting off first, Weathers' group navigated the South Col, making their way to the summit face. The evening was unexpectedly beautiful, fatigue momentarily forgotten. The windstorm had subsided, and the temperature, a relatively mild -10 degrees Celsius at their elevation, was almost welcoming. The stars twinkled brilliantly overhead, casting an ethereal glow on the climbers. The group progressed slowly and rhythmically toward the summit. They had to focus only on moving 1 foot at a time, pausing between each step. As they moved onward, the climbers faced a treacherous traverse to the left, where limited visibility heightened the danger. It was here that Weathers' journey took a daunting turn. His vision began to fail him. Frustration gripped Weathers as he realized he could no longer see the mountain's face. Nearsightedness had plagued him for years. He had struggled with icy glasses, problematic contacts, and various devices to keep his vision clear while climbing. Nothing had worked. In a bid for safety, Weathers had undergone radial keratotomy surgery a year and a half prior to his Everest expedition. The procedure, which involved making tiny incisions in the corneas to alter the eye's focal lengths, aimed to improve his vision. Yet, unbeknownst to Weathers, at high altitudes, a surgically altered cornea could flatten and thicken, shortening the focal length and rendering him virtually blind. Undeterred, Weathers clung to the hope that daylight would restore his sight. Indeed, as the light returned, his vision improved, and he resumed climbing, albeit with difficulty. Weathers even urged his companions to forge ahead, vowing to catch up once his sight was fully restored. Tragically, his situation worsened when he inadvertently lacerated his right cornea with an ice-crusted glove, blurring his vision and impairing his depth perception. He knew that unless his sight improved, he could not ascend beyond the balcony, a point roughly 450 meters below the summit. When Hall realized that Weathers' vision had deteriorated to a dangerous level, he made the difficult decision to forbid him from continuing the ascent. Weathers was instructed to wait by the side of the trail, and they would collect him on their descent from the summit. Reluctantly, Weathers complied. As his 7 teammates pushed onward, he remained in place. Several other groups descended past him, kindly offering to include him in their caravans, but he declined, determined to wait for Hall as promised. But tragically, Hall would never return. Upon reaching the summit, a fierce blizzard engulfed the southwest face of Everest. Visibility was reduced to near zero, and the path back to Camp 4 vanished beneath the snow. Doug Hansen, too weak to carry on, was stranded. Hall refused to leave his side and, in the end, succumbed to the unforgiving cold. His body still lies frozen just below the south summit, a haunting reminder of the mountain's wrath. As hours ticked by, Weathers grew increasingly anxious. With daylight fading, his vision worsened until he was nearly blind. As night fell, the relentless blizzard raged on. Temperatures plummeted, and ferocious winds whipped up snow. Trapped in this nightmarish scenario, Weathers was left exposed to the elements for an agonizing 10 hours. The merciless cold began to affect his mind, conjuring hallucinations of shadowy figures that appeared and vanished like ghosts in the storm. On the brink of surrender, Weathers' resolve was rekindled when he spotted 2 young climbers descending. They informed him that Hall remained on the ridge, at least 3 hours behind. At first, Weathers insisted on waiting for Hall, but ultimately agreed to descend with Mike Groom, another guide from Hall's team. To provide stability, Mike fastened a rope around Weathers' waist, as descending a mountain often posed greater risks than ascending it. Unfortunately, Weathers' crampons were ill-equipped for the treacherous conditions, causing him to slip and fall. Tethered to Mike, they both careened down the slope, relying on their ice axes to halt their descent. This harrowing sequence repeated 2 or 3 times before they finally reached the South Col in under half an hour. As they pressed on toward camp, a thunderous roar echoed from the mountain, heralding the arrival of a monstrous blizzard. Winds whipped at a staggering 130 kilometers per hour, and the temperature plummeted to an unfathomable -51 degrees Celsius. With his vision all but gone, Weathers clung to Mike's sleeve as their group inched forward, straining to discern the slope that lay hidden beneath the blinding storm. Suddenly, another climber, Nil, sensed that something was amiss and called for the group to halt. They were a mere 10 meters from the edge of the South Col, where the icy slope plunged 2,500 meters into the abyss. Just a few more steps would have sealed their fate. It was then that Weathers realized he could no longer feel or move his right hand, a telltale sign of frostbite. Under normal circumstances, he would remove 2 of his 3 layers of gloves and press the affected hand against his bare chest beneath his jacket to warm it. However, as he removed the layers, his hand began to freeze even with the 3rd layer still in place. The frigid temperatures inflicted searing pain, startling him so much that his left hand released the gloves. In an instant, they were snatched by the wind, disappearing into the whiteout. Faced with the dire loss of protection for his right hand, Weathers quickly tucked it back under his jacket. Just then, the clouds parted, revealing the majestic Great Bear constellation. A Russian guide from another group seized the opportunity, declaring they could now navigate back to camp using the stars as a reference point. A plan was swiftly devised. The strongest among them would embark on a high-speed trek towards camp to secure help and rescue for Weathers, Yasuko, Charlotte, and Tim. Once the advance party departed, the remaining weakened climbers huddled together on the ice, seeking warmth and shelter from the biting wind. Sleep became their most treacherous foe. They knew that if they succumbed to slumber, their body temperatures would plummet, and their hearts would eventually cease to beat. The chilling embrace of hypothermia. Mike and 2 others miraculously found high camp that night, though they were crawling on their hands and knees upon arrival. Exhausted, they managed to convey the urgent need for help for the small group stranded in the storm. The extreme conditions deterred most from venturing out, except for the courageous Russian, Anatoly Bukreev. Meanwhile, Weathers' companions looked on in horror as he stood against the merciless wind, his arms outstretched and his naked right hand frozen solid, resembling a slab of meat. Delirious from hypothermia and hypoxia, and teetering on the brink of death, Weathers bellowed, "I've got this all figured out," just before the wind knocked him off his feet, and he vanished into the deep snow. By the time Anatoly found the frozen group, Beck Weathers and Yasuko Namba seemed beyond hope. They were in a deep hypothermic coma, and nothing could be done to save them. Instead, he focused on safely lowering the other 2 climbers to high camp. The following morning, Canadian Dr. Stuart Hutchinson and 3 Sherpas set out to search for the climbers who hadn't returned the night before. They stumbled upon Weathers and Namba, both barely clinging to life. Namba was in a critical state, and Hutchinson had to remove a layer of ice from her face just to examine her. He determined that there was nothing they could do. Her skin was a ghastly white, and her eyes were dilated. Turning to Weathers, who was partially buried in snow, Hutchinson noticed the rigid right arm frozen above his head, the jacket open to the waist, and the ice-covered face. He deemed the man before him to be as close to death and still breathing as any dying patient he had ever encountered. Stuart returned to camp and informed the others that Weathers and Yasuko were dead. They called base camp to relay the tragic news so that Weathers and Yasuko's families could be notified. Once again, Weathers was left for dead. But at 4 p.m. on the same day, a miracle unfolded. Entombed in ice and presumed dead on the mountain, Weathers suddenly regained consciousness. At first, he believed he was at home in Texas. Then, in what he describes as an epiphany, Weathers saw his family vividly in his mind's eye. He felt disconnected from his surroundings, enveloped in the warm, comforting sensation of being in his own bed. Disoriented by the white clouds and snow, his frozen arm provided something to focus on. He struck it against the ground, and it sounded like wood. Adrenaline surged through his system as he began to grasp his predicament. This was not bed. This was not a dream, he thought. Realizing the gravity of his situation, he knew he needed to act. I'm on the mountain, but I don't have a clue where. If I don't get up, if I don't stand, if I don't start thinking about where I am and how to get out of there, then this is going to be over very quickly. With great pain, Weathers got to his feet, leaving behind his bag and ice axe. He knew he had to give it his all. Initially, he attempted to map the terrain to find his bearings and a way to orient himself. With the entire horizon shrouded in white after more than 20 hours of the deadly storm and his vision severely impaired, he faced immense challenges ahead. In a moment of clarity, a memory saves Weathers. He recalls that Camp 4 is located upwind. So he concludes that if the wind hasn't changed, the camp must be somewhere against the wind. He starts walking, seeing nothing, falling, getting back up, falling again and getting back up again. His determination is unyielding, resolved to keep going until he either falls off the slope or reaches the camp. After a few meters, both of his hands are completely frozen. The cold slices into his face. He's in deep hypothermia, hasn't eaten for 3 days, hasn't drunk for 2 days, is lost and completely blind. As time passes, a wave of resignation begins to wash over him while he watches the sun slowly descend on the horizon. He's fully aware that if the sun disappears, he'll vanish with it because, without light, there are no visual landmarks, and the plummeting temperature will cause him to freeze to death. Then, after wandering for what feels like an eternity, he spots what he thinks are 2 strange blue rocks in front of him and believes they must be the tents of the camp. As he approaches, about 30 meters from these mysterious rocks, he discovers a silhouette, that of Todd Lawson, a leader of another expedition. Against all odds, Weathers has managed to reach Camp 4. Todd later recounted that when he saw Weathers arrive, his face resembled a black mask covered in a carbonized crust rather than a human face. His snow-filled jacket hung open to the waist, while his completely bare, frozen right arm was raised above his head, and his eyesight was gone. Stunned by what he was witnessing, Todd eventually snaps to his senses. He rushes to Weathers, grasps his arm, and guides him to the first tent, where he lays him down in 2 sleeping bags. He places hot water bottles beneath the blankets and administers a steroid injection. Everyone is astonished, but despite Weathers' miraculous return and his near-death condition, no one expects him to survive the night. To their surprise, Weathers is very much alive the next morning. Hans, whom Weathers had previously met during other expeditions, helps him stand up, secure his crampons, and helps him drink 2 liters of tea. The man once presumed dead is now ready to face the mountain again. Together, they begin their descent. Upon reaching Camp 1, a helicopter is dispatched to pick up Weathers and another survivor. This daring rescue becomes the highest helicopter rescue ever completed. As Weathers embarked on the road to recovery, he faced 10 challenging surgeries. His right arm was amputated halfway between the elbow and wrist, while all 4 fingers and his thumb on his left hand were also amputated. In addition, parts of both feet were removed. His nose, too, was amputated and skillfully reconstructed using tissue from his ear and forehead. Thank you so much for watching. We appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, be sure to check out the other great content on our channel. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more. Thank you again, and see you in the next video.